They came in numbers beyond counting. They came in numbers beyond counting. A living river of muscle and horn flowing across the African plains, driven by instincts older than human memory. 4 weeks they had marched northward, following the promise of rain and the sweet green grass that rain brings forth. Mothers walked beside calves born just months before. Old bulls who had survived a dozen migrations plodded alongside yearlings experiencing their first great journey. 1.5 million wildebeest, the largest overland migration remaining on planet Earth. A phenomenon so vast that astronauts have photographed it from orbit, a dark ribbon of life stretching across the golden Savannah. But every journey has its moment of truth. Every migration reaches a point where the path forward demands everything, where survival requires risking everything. For the wildebeest, that moment comes at the river. The Mara River winds through the Serengeti Mara ecosystem like a serpent, its brown waters hiding dangers that have claimed countless lives across countless generations. To complete their migration, the herds must cross. There is no alternative route. There is no way around. There is only through. Welcome to Wild Biome. Tonight, we witness a crossing that would become legend among those who study the Great Migration. A single day when the mathematics of survival failed catastrophically. A morning when 10,000 wildebeest entered the water and never emerged on the other side. This is the story of the last crossing. A living river of muscle and horn flowing across the African plains, driven by instincts older than human memory. For weeks they had marched northward, following the promise of rain and the sweet green grass that rain brings forth. Mothers walked beside calves born just months before. Old bulls who had survived a dozen migrations plodded alongside yearlings experiencing their first great journey. 1.5 million wildebeest, the largest overland migration remaining on planet Earth. A phenomenon so vast that astronauts have photographed it from orbit, a dark ribbon of life stretching across the golden Savannah. But every journey has its moment of truth. Every migration reaches a point where the path forward demands everything, where survival requires risking everything. For the wildebeest, that moment comes at the river. Mara River winds through the Serengeti Mara ecosystem like a serpent, its brown waters hiding dangers that have claimed countless lives across countless generations. To complete their migration, the herds must cross. There is no alternative route. There is no way around. There is only through. Welcome to Wild Biome. Tonight, we witness a crossing that would become legend among those who study the Great Migration. A single day when the mathematics of survival failed catastrophically. A morning when 10,000 wildebeest entered the water and never emerged on the other side. This is the story of the last crossing. To understand what happened at the river that day, we must first understand the forces that brought 1.5 million animals to its banks. The Great Wildebeest Migration represents the largest movement of terrestrial mammals on Earth, an annual cycle that has continued for over 1 million years. The migration follows the rains. During the wet season, from December through May, the herds concentrate on the short grass plains of the southeastern Serengeti. Here, volcanic soils enriched by ancient eruptions produce grass of exceptional nutritional quality. The calcium and phosphorus content of this grass proves particularly important for lactating females and their rapidly growing calves. But the rains do not last forever. As the dry season approaches, the southeastern plains transform from verdant paradise to parched wasteland. The grass that sustained millions of animals withers and dies. Water sources that seemed permanent during the rains evaporate into memory. The herds must move or perish. Their journey takes them first westward, then northward, following the retreating moisture across the vast Serengeti ecosystem. By July and August, the leading edges of the migration reach the Mara River, which marks the boundary between Tanzania's Serengeti National Park and Kenya's Masai Mara National Reserve. The timing of this arrival varies from year to year, influenced by the precise patterns of rainfall that determine where grass grows and water accumulates. But the crossing itself remains constant, an unavoidable obstacle that every northward moving wildebeest must eventually confront. The river awaits them with ancient patience, its waters swollen by rains in the Kenyan highlands, its currents running swift and cold despite the African sun. And within those waters, other ancient presences await as well. The blue wildebeest, known also as the brindled gnu, cuts an unlikely figure among Africa's graceful antelopes. Its body seems assembled from spare parts, with a heavy front end mounted on spindly legs, a broad face, that appears almost bovine, and horns that curve first outward and then inward like parentheses framing its skull. Yet this ungainly appearance conceals remarkable adaptations for survival. Adult wildebeests weigh between 350 and 600 pounds, with males typically larger than females. Their muscular bodies can sustain speeds of 50 miles per hour over short distances and maintain a traveling pace of approximately 10 miles per hour for extended periods. Their herding behavior represents perhaps their most important survival strategy. Individual wildebeests possess relatively poor eyesight compared to some African ungulates, but a herd of thousands provides countless eyes, scanning for danger, countless ears, listening for approaching predators. When one animal startles, that alarm spreads instantly through the group, triggering collective flight that confuses hunting predators trying to select individual targets. This same herding instinct, however, creates vulnerabilities under certain circumstances. Wildebeests follow one another with almost compulsive intensity. When lead animals move in a particular direction, those behind follow without independent assessment of whether that direction is wise. This behavior serves them well on the open plains, where following the herd means following collective wisdom about water and grazing locations. At a river crossing, it can prove catastrophic. Wildebeest also demonstrate remarkable reproductive sync. Approximately 80% of calves are born within a 3-week period at the start of the wet season, flooding the population with vulnerable newborns simultaneously. This strategy overwhelms predators through sheer numbers, ensuring that while many calves will die, many more will survive simply because predators cannot consume them all. By the time the herds reach the Mara River, the calves, born during that synchronized birthing period, are approximately 6 months old. They have survived the initial vulnerable weeks. They have learned to keep pace with the herd's movements. They have developed the strength and coordination to run from predators, but they have never crossed a river. The Mara River stretches approximately 250 miles from its source in Kenya, Eskimo Escarpment, to its eventual merger with Lake Victoria. For most of its length, it flows peacefully through countryside that has been progressively converted to agriculture and human settlement, but within the protected areas of the Serengeti-Mara ecosystem, the river retains its wild character. Here, the Mara runs brown with sediment carried from the highlands. Its depth varies dramatically depending on recent rainfall, ranging from waist-deep during dry periods to completely impassable torrents following heavy storms. Its current, even during moderate flows, runs strong enough to sweep adult wildebeest off their feet if they lose footing on the slippery river. The banks present their own challenges. In many locations, the approach to the water requires descending steep slopes, where loose soil gives way under the weight of massed animals. The far side often demands climbing equally steep or steeper inclines, requiring exhausted animals to claw their way up muddy surfaces, while the current continues to pull at their bodies. The Nile crocodile population of the Mara River has been extensively studied by researchers who have documented individuals exceeding 15 feet in length. These massive reptiles have learned, across decades of observation, exactly when and where the wildebeest cross. They gather at traditional crossing points in numbers that can exceed several hundred individuals, waiting with the patience that 80 million years of evolution has refined. Lions too have adapted their behavior to exploit the migration. Prides that hold territories along the river enjoy seasonal abundance that transforms their hunting success. Exhausted, disoriented wildebeest emerging from the water provide far easier prey than alert animals on the open plains. Hyenas, leopards, and African wild dogs also concentrate near crossing points during migration season. Even vultures adjust their ranging patterns to take advantage of the inevitable casualties. The crossing points of the Mara River represent killing grounds refined by evolution and experience. Every predator in the ecosystem knows when the herds will arrive. Every predator positions itself to exploit the opportunities that crossing provides, and the wildebeest have no choice but to come anyway. The morning began with a concentration of animals that exceeded anything the local safari guides had witnessed in years of observation. Estimates placed the immediate herd at between 50,000 and 70,000 wildebeest, with additional columns still arriving from the south throughout the early hours. The herd had reached the river the previous evening but had not attempted to cross. This hesitation is common and reflects the genuine danger that wildebeest instinctively recognize in the rushing water. A herd may spend hours or even days massed at a crossing point, individual animals approaching the water's edge before retreating, the collective nervousness preventing any individual from taking the decisive plunge. What triggers a crossing to begin remains somewhat mysterious to Sometimes a single bold individual simply walks into the water and begins swimming, with thousands following within minutes. Sometimes zebras, which often travel with wildebeest herds, enter first and provide the psychological trigger for their new companions. Sometimes nothing observable occurs, but the herd's collective hesitation suddenly resolves into collective action. On this particular morning, the trigger appeared to be pressure from behind. The continuing arrival of additional animals created crowding at the traditional crossing point. Those at the front found themselves pushed ever closer to the water by the mass of bodies accumulating behind them. Eventually, the choice between entering the river and being trampled by their own kind ceased to be a choice at all. The first wildebeest entered the water at approximately 7:30 in the morning. Within minutes, a stream of animals was flowing into the river, the rate of entry accelerating as the herd's collective hesitation gave way to collective compulsion. The crossing had begun, and already, the conditions that would transform it into tragedy were present. Several circumstances combined on that morning to create a catastrophe, unprecedented in recorded observation of the Great Migration. Each factor alone might have caused significant casualties. Together, they proved devastating. The first factor was the water level itself. Rains in the Kenyan highlands during the preceding weeks had swollen the Mara to well above its seasonal average. The current ran faster than typical, and the depth at the traditional crossing point exceeded what many animals, particularly the 6-month-old calves, could safely navigate. The second factor was the crossing point's geography. This particular location featured a steep descent into the water on the southern bank, requiring animals to essentially leap into the current rather than wade gradually into deepening water. The northern bank presented an even greater challenge, a near-vertical climb of approximately 8 feet from water level to solid ground. Under normal conditions, adult wildebeest could scramble up this bank with difficulty. Under the conditions present that morning, even strong adults struggled to gain purchase on the mud-slicked surface. The third factor was the sheer number of animals attempting to cross simultaneously. As tens of thousands of wildebeest entered the water, the crossing point became catastrophically congested. Animals emerging from the current found their path to safety blocked by others still attempting to climb the bank. Those still in the water found themselves trapped between the current and the mass of bodies ahead of them. The fourth factor was the crocodile population. The high water level and strong current had concentrated the river-S crocodiles at the few locations where successful hunting remained possible. The traditional crossing point represented one such location. Observers estimated over 200 crocodiles present in the immediate vicinity when the crossing began. These factors created a feedback loop of increasing lethality. Early casualties began accumulating at the base of the northern bank, where exhausted animals that could not climb were swept back into the current or seized by crocodiles. These bodies created additional obstacles for following animals. The blockage slowed the exit rate from the river, while the entry rate from the southern bank continued on. More animals meant more crowding, meant more casualties, meant more blockage. The mathematics of the situation spiraled beyond any possibility of natural correction. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the crossing had become a drowning. The river, never more than perhaps 50 meters wide at this location, had become choked with struggling, dying, and dead wildebeest. Animals entering the water from the southern bank now faced not open current, but a mass of bodies, some still alive and fighting for survival, many already drowned and floating with the bloated stillness of death. The crocodiles had ceased hunting in any organized fashion. The sheer quantity of available prey had overwhelmed their normal selective predation. They fed opportunistically on the endless supply of carcasses the current delivered to them, gorging beyond any normal satiation. On the northern bank, a scene of desperate struggle continued for those animals still alive in the water. The exit point had become a bottleneck where dozens of wildebeest fought simultaneously to climb the same few feet of accessible bank. They scrambled over each other, pushed each other back into the water, and in their panic, created conditions where none could successfully escape. Those who did reach the top of the bank often collapsed from exhaustion within feet of safety. Many showed injuries, gashes from crocodile teeth, wounds from being trampled, legs broken during the chaotic scramble to escape. These injured survivors would provide meals for the lions, hyenas, and vultures that gathered in unprecedented numbers. On the southern bank, the tragedy continued to compound. The animals at the front of the herd could see what was occurring in the water ahead of them. Their fear was evident in their behavior. The hesitation and retreat that would normally signal a herd's decision to abandon a crossing attempt. but the pressure from the tens of thousands of animals still arriving behind them left no room for retreat. They entered the water anyway, pushed by the irresistible force of the herd's momentum. Some survived the crossing despite the chaos. Many did not. By noon, the rate of entry had finally slowed as the immediate pressure from the herd's rear echelons eased, but the carnage in the water continued. Thousands of animals remained trapped in the current, too exhausted to swim, too blocked by boadies. To escape, they drowned by the hundreds, their corpses adding to the mass that made escape impossible for those still fighting. When researchers and wildlife officials surveyed the crossing site in the days that followed, the scale of the disaster became horrifyingly clear. Conservative estimates placed the death toll at over 10,000 wallabies, with some calculations suggesting the true number might exceed 12,000. The river downstream had become clogged with carcasses, creating temporary dams that altered water flow for miles. The stench of decomposition spread across the landscape, detectable from several kilometers away. The ecological impact of this mass mortality event would unfold over the following weeks and months. The carcasses that accumulated at and below the crossing point represented an enormous injection of nutrients into the river ecosystem. Aquatic scavengers, from fish to insects to microorganisms, experienced population explosions as they processed the organic material. The surge of nutrients would eventually reach Lake Victoria, contributing to complex cascade effects that limnologists are still working to understand. Terrestrial scavengers faced an embarrassment of riches. Vulture populations in the area consumed carcasses continuously for weeks. Hyena clans established temporary feeding territories around the largest concentrations of bad. Lions that might normally hunt once every few days instead fed daily without the expenditure of hunting effort. The wildebeest population as a whole absorbed the loss without apparent long-term impact. 10,000 animals represents less than 1% of the total migration population. Such losses, while dramatic when witnessed directly, fall within the natural variation that the species has evolved to sustain. The synchronized birthing strategy that produces hundreds of thousands of calves each wet season specifically anticipates significant mortality rates. The river, of course, felt nothing. It continued flowing as it had for millennia, carrying its burden of sediment and nutrients toward Lake Victoria. The crocodiles digested their enormous meals and returned to their patient waiting. The crossing point that had witnessed such horror would host successful crossings within days, the surviving herds apparently undeterred by the losses of their companions. Nature does not mourn, it simply continues. The crossing disaster we have described, while exceptional in its scale, represents an amplification of risks inherent in every river crossing rather than a fundamentally different phenomenon. Understanding why such events occur requires examining the evolutionary and ecological factors that make the Great Migration simultaneously sustainable and dangerous. The wildebeest herding instinct evolved as a response to predation pressure on the open plains. Following the herd provides safety through numbers, through many eyes watching for danger, through the confusion that mass movement creates for selecting predators. This instinct serves the species extraordinarily well across most of their annual cycle. At river crossings, however, the same instinct becomes dangerous. The compulsion to follow other animals into the water overrides individual assessment of danger. The urgency created by animals pressing from behind prevents the cautious hesitation that might lead a herd to select a safer crossing point or wait for better conditions. The behavior pattern that provides safety on the plains produces catastrophe at the river. The wildebeest population can sustain significant crossing losses while maintaining stable or even growing numbers. The benefits of strong herding instinct across the majority of the year outweigh the costs that occasionally accumulate at river crossings. From an individual animist perspective, of course, this population-level calculus provides no comfort. The wildebeest that drowns in a mass crossing event experiences no consolation from knowing that the species will persist. Natural selection operates on reproductive success across generations, not on individual welfare within single lifetimes. Environmental factors can transform typical crossing risks into mass casualty events. Unusual water levels, bank conditions, or predator concentrations can tip the balance from dangerous to catastrophic. Climate variability, which affects rainfall patterns, and thus both river levels and the timing of migration movements, creates conditions for disaster years without any human intervention. Human impacts, however, have begun to influence this ancient system in ways that may increase the frequency or severity of mass mortality events. Agricultural development in the Mo escarpment has altered water flow patterns in the Mar River. Tourist pressure at popular crossing points may influence wildebeest behavior in subtle ways that researchers are still documenting. The wildebeest that died in the crossing we have described fell victim to natural factors operating at unusual intensity. Future generations may face challenges, unlike any their ancestors confronted. The sun sets over the Mara River on an evening like countless others before it. The water flows brown and strong toward the distant lake, carrying the sediment that gives it color and the nutrients that feed its ecosystem. Along its banks, the evidence of the disaster has largely disappeared, consumed by the efficient recycling that characterizes African scavenger communities. Upstream, the surviving herds have continued their northward journey. They graze now on the green grass that drew them across the river, rebuilding the body condition depleted by weeks of traveling. The calves that survive the crossing grow stronger daily, learning the patterns and rhythms that will guide their own migrations in years to come. Next year, they will return. The cycle that has continued for 1,000,000 years will continue for at least one more. The herds will gather at the traditional crossing points. They will hesitate, sensing the danger that their ancestors learned to recognize across countless generations. And then, driven by the same instincts that sustain their species, they will enter the water. Some will not survive. That has always been true and will always be true. The river takes its toll every crossing season, sometimes in modest numbers that barely register against the vastness of the migration, sometimes in catastrophic events that shock even experienced observers. But the migration itself persists because it must. The seasonal patterns of rainfall that created this phenomenon have not fundamentally changed. The nutritional demands that drive millions of animals to follow the grass have not been satisfied by any alternative strategy. There is no individual heroism in this persistence, no conscious courage that drives animals into dangerous water. There is only the accumulated wisdom of evolution, written in instincts that serve the species even when they doom individuals. The wildebeest that died in the crossing we've described died, not despite their instincts, but because of them, following behaviors that have sustained their kind for 1,000,000 years. Perhaps there is something noble in that persistence, something worthy of respect even if it cannot be called brave. The Great Migration represents life insisting on continuing, generation after generation, crossing after crossing, regardless of the costs that any single crossing might extract. This has been Wild Biome. Thank you for joining us at the water's edge, where the greatest migration on Earth confronts its greatest challenge. The river will be waiting when the herds return. The crocodiles will be patient. The crossing will continue. And life, as it always does, will find its way to the other side.